What's up people, hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to another video here at Most Amazing Top 10. Now there's something about the Titanic that has always just pulled me in. It's one of the oddest tragedies that ever happened in my opinion, and I know a lot worse has happened since and our hearts will go on, but come on. The movie was heart-wrenching. I've even seen the bloody animated version, which I feel like people don't know there is one. There is, it's very good. I've watched numerous documentaries on it, I've seen it all. It really just makes me feel a type of way, so here are the top 10 scary objects from the Titanic. Starting off with number 10 is the inspection card. Passenger Marion, meanwhile, originally had different travel plans, but when a coal strike delayed her scheduled trip on the Majestic, she came aboard the Titanic. On the inspection card, you can see her name and the Majestic crossed out and replaced with the Titanic instead. Marion didn't survive the shipwreck, and the card really just makes you think. They were probably on a time constraint, rushing to get somewhere, and thought if the Titanic is the quickest and soonest way to get there, then the Titanic it'll be, not having any idea of what that split decision would do. But then again, none of them knew, right? Coming in at number 9 is Amy. A bracelet was recovered from the shipwreck of the Titanic and auctioned off 100 years after the ship sank. The bracelet itself looks like a gold chain and it has Amy in the middle, made from silver and diamonds. Honestly, there was something about it that just struck me as eerie. Maybe it's the fact that Amy is probably dead right now and she could have been wearing that when the ship hit the iceberg and everything was just going down. And I think it's all the possibilities behind the bracelet which is what makes it scary. Was she sliding to the other side of the ship and the bracelet got caught on something and came off? Was it part of her luggage that went down with the ship? We'll never know. Maybe it didn't even belong to an Amy. Maybe a man had gotten it for his wife or girlfriend and was gonna give it to her when the ship docked. We'll just never know. At number 8 we have the plan. This was the blueprint of the Titanic drawn by the Naval Architects Department at White Star Line, which was the company that owned the Titanic. Sold for €308,000 at an auction, the plan is actually one of the most important pieces of memorabilia we have because it was heavily used for investigation after the disaster to see if the ship itself had any role to play in the crash. Were there any faulty areas, any super vulnerable spots that perhaps they missed in planning, etc. Witnesses and survivors of the crash were shown the plan so they could point out where exactly the ship hit the iceberg, and those points are still marked onto the plan. The drawing itself is an actual marvel. It's a whopping 9.2 meters long, which surprised me initially, but given how big the Starliner was herself, it just doesn't surprise me at all. Filling our number 7 slot is the trunk. There are many stories explaining why Howard Irwin never boarded the Titanic when he was meant to. One story was that because he was a heavy gambler, he was beaten up and kidnapped and forced to work on a ship going to the Middle East. That's some Jason Bourne ting right there. He was supposed to go to New York with his friend Henry Sutor, and so when Henry got on the ship on April 10th, he brought Howard's trunk with him, expecting to meet him later on, and of course he never did. They recovered Howard's trunk from the shipwreck and he's obviously still alive, hopefully back home and not still working on a ship somewhere, but his friend Henry didn't survive. Now at number 6 are the keys. They actually did a really good job of conserving these keys. I thought they'd be rusty and old and water damaged, but they look like they're in tip-top shape. This specific set was used by Titanic crewman Samuel Hemming, who was the storekeeper of the ship. He was ordered to use it to unlock the door where the lifeboat lanterns were kept to make sure all 15 lifeboats had lit oil lamps. This was done soon after the captains realized doom was inevitable and that there was no way they were going to avoid the iceberg. Honestly, just imagine being told you have to do that and why. He was probably trying to comprehend near imminent death whilst making sure all the lamps were on. Real MVP right there. You go, Samuel. Coming in at number 5 is the violin. Sold for €1.5 million, this violin belonged to Wallace Hartley, who was part of the band who did live entertainment for the ship. Now if you've seen the movie, you know that the violin player starts playing when the ship goes down, and the rest of the band just joins in to kind of, mask the sound of chaos and death around everyone. And you'd think that that was just for effect since it is a movie and they're trying to pull at your heartstrings, but it actually happened. Wallace did grab his violin during the ship's last few critical moments and started playing Nearer My God to Thee, inspiring his bandmates to do the same. Honestly, imagine that being the soundtrack of your death. I don't know if I'm into it. At number 4 is the robe. I think the robe was meant to be beige originally, but after spending so long on the ocean floor, it turned this light greenish color. The silk kimono style robe was worn by a first-class passenger called Lucy Christiana, whereas other reports say it was worn by Lady Duff Gordon. Either way, she wore it as she was escaping the ship and hurrying into a lifeboat, and then later the RMS oddest Carpathia. Honestly, that is a fancy ass getaway outfit if I ever saw one, but I'm not even surprised. I feel like people probably just ran for safety regardless of if they were wearing a three-piece suit or were completely naked. I would have taken it off, to be able to run faster, but they were also getting into lifeboats, into freezing water, so the cover-up makes complete sense. Filling our number 3 slot is the pocket watch. Till 2008, this was actually the most expensive Titanic artifact sold in an auction. It was sold for 130,000 euros, which is around 146,000 USD. It belonged to a first-class steward on the ship called Edmund Stone, who also owned the master keys to the whole first-class cabin, so he was pretty up there. Eerily enough, the watch stopped ticking at exactly 2:16 AM, which would have been around the time Edmund landed in the ice-cold water of the ocean. Now, this is a proper relic frozen in time. I feel when I read that sentence while I was researching this video, it almost made me flash back to seeing this man's arm go into the Atlantic Ocean, even though I wasn't even there. It honestly gives me chills, and I don't know if it's because the fact it stopped when he died is freaky, or I'm just imagining this cold water all over me. Let me know. Actually, you can't. Scratch that. Now at number 2 is the last lifeboat. Collapsible A was the last lifeboat to leave the Titanic. Not everyone survived, but most of them were saved by Oceanic. A month after the sinking, it was recovered and workers were doing their best to patch it back up. But what they found inside the lifeboat made them speechless. Inside Collapsible A, they found the decomposing bodies of 3 passengers. One was wearing a dinner jacket, later identified as first-class passenger Thompson Beatty, and the other 2 bodies were firemen that had just been stuffed under the lifeboat seats. One of their arms even came off as the boarding officer was trying to move them. A wedding ring was found too, but I guess Oceanic left the dead bodies behind when they were saving the rest. The ring belonged to Elin Lindell, who got to the lifeboat but later drowned. Her husband held the ring on Collapsible A till he too died, and his body has never been recovered. And finally, at number 1 is the letter. I think this is one of the most profound artifacts that was recovered from the Titanic, but also one of the most spine-chilling. April 14th, 1912, the Titanic hit the iceberg. 2.5 hours later, the ship sank with 1,500 people aboard. During that 2.5 hours, first-class passenger Dr. Washington Dodge decided to write a letter. Even his name sounds bougie, I'm not surprised he was first class. In the letter, he vividly describes the ship's final hours, the sinking, the chaos, the loss. It's one of the earliest, most immediate accounts of the disaster ever found. His handwriting is all over the place, which I'm sure you can understand given his state of mind. But he did in fact survive the shipwreck, so I guess it wasn't all bad after all. I mean, what am I saying? It was all bad. It was all bad. And that's it for today's video, guys. Having been a tragedy that basically everyone knows, this video was actually really fun to do despite how morbid the content is. I saw the movie Ghost Ship when I was young, and now every time I imagine the wreckage of Titanic underwater, I just keep imagining this ghost ship with a bunch of like first, second, and third class passengers, ghosts just milling about. Either way, let me know what you guys thought of this video, and as always, I'm your host Ayman Hassan, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!